Like many of us here, I found an address in the cracks, oscillating between theorizing and making, between the corporate and the grassroots, between building intelligence without body for bodies without intelligence. Let me be honest. This is not a how-to. This is not an essay, but rather a cracked invocation, a refusal to instruct, and a rant in 3 acts. A rancid request to find the victim in the murderer's closet, to locate the poetic inside of the rigid. I begin with the need for poetry, precisely to hold what the model discards, to speak what prediction silences, to speak of tagging sweatshops in Nairobi as servers hum on occupied land and algorithms forecast genocide, then offer skincare ads. Borders surveil the poor into hypervisibility while the rich remain end-to-end encrypted. Coloniality here is not a metaphor. It's not a luxury. Data is not a metaphor for the empire. It is its engine, its syntax, and its will to know without being known. So I wondered if by some blip of fate, the master's tool might yet become the death of the master's house. But the master had no tools, only an imperative to be part of a false equation of bastard algebra. Data is not a metaphor for coloniality. It's its engineer, architect, and poet of extraction. It was also Edward Glissant who reminded us that the poet's truth is also the desired truth of the other, whereas precisely the truth of a computer system is claused back upon its own sufficient logic. Moreover, every conclusion reached by such a system has been inspired in the original data, whereas poetics open onto unpredictable and unheard of things. This is why we turn to poetry, not for ornament, but to escape a critical velocity, for fracture, for uncertainty, looking for an opening. So I actually derive a lot of my expression in this particular instance from pre-Islamic poetic thought. And there were many forms and really critical forms of expression at the time. The 3 that I want to highlight today as kind of modes of ranting almost are Rithaa, Elegy, so this has to do with mourning, irony, which is Hijaa, which has to do with dismantling of power. There's also an instance from the Abbasid era where a bunch of poets were able to dethrone the Supreme Court using this form of poetic expression. And the last is actually Madh, which is a mix between contemplation, praise, and meditation. So these are the 3 acts of today. Let's see. Nope. So in my first act, I would like to start with Mourning, or Elegy. And perhaps this is a mourning, not a mourning of resignation, but a loud mourning of clarity. This is a mourning or a grief sharp enough to interrupt the smooth surfaces of technological optimism. What I want to introduce, what I want to mourn, is actually a concept of catfish epistemologies. This is perhaps when a system really simulates knowledge without really processing it. It performs credibility without relation. It mimics expertise without accountability. And in my work and in navigating the AI landscape, I am confronted by 1,000 little catfishes. And catfishing here is really not an accident. It's really a ruling logic. It is a business model, perhaps. And when I talk about catfishing here, it is exactly what the system has intended, right? So we started with imaginaries in the early days of the internet that really promised us liberation, anonymity, accessibility, and they really promised us a version of the truth which is accessible. And what I've only seen so far is even a more violent evolution of the counter-imaginaries of dark patterns, hyper-surveillance, myth-truth, and mechanized bias. And the scaffolding of these false imaginaries, this catfishing of imagination, can be seen and expressed through the TESCREAL bundle, which we might be very familiar with. This is one that really rejects a lot of the notions behind humans as humans, but humans as kind of transhuman. These are the kind of genealogies that really drive us into exploring space before exploring our neighborhoods, towards mitigating harm 50 years from the future and not the immediate harms of today. And the architects of these violent catfish epistemologies are really embedded in the technological fabric that even brought us here today. This kind of catfishing dreams of escaping relation itself, replacing history with optimization, and replacing accountability with calculation. And we see that the risk as an object is actually really violent at the moment. So I speak from a place of mourning because as critical thinkers, as policymakers, as theorists, we have nowhere to go but to face this reality of a genocidal, algorithmically powered warfare. So where do we go now? How do we mourn these false imaginaries? How do we dream and respond to the perfect catfish of AI, something that is seamless, unchallenged, and unfelt? Here I propose first an invocation to look at alternative imaginaries of care. They exist. They're there today. They're there in this room. The whole call of the festival is this. But I also want to call for mourning to clear out the space for a different kind of rant. What I want to do today is really acknowledge the lost possibilities, that justice could have been relational, that knowledge could have been accountable, that technology could have been situated, slow, and caring. Mourning is the way we refuse the perfect performance, is the way we insist underneath the system's coherence in a history of violence. Right. So this brings me to the second act. And the second act is actually a hidden, reluctant manual. And it's a second form of poetic expression. That is Hijaa, or irony. And I said irony is such a powerful tool, especially when it comes from a place of systemic, when it's situated in systemic struggle. This isn't new, of course. When you think about irony and internet culture, we have a heritage of dank memes as cultural critique, brain rot as a response to the attention platform. But irony here is not just subversion. There is a deeper irony that I want to tap into. Irony is a state of being and interaction. And one example from kind of my early teens is Alaa Abd El-Fattah. And this is actually a child of rupture himself. He's a software engineer and a blogger who found himself in the cracks of political tyranny in Egypt in the early 2000s. He rebelled and was imprisoned for what is close, and is still currently imprisoned for what is close to 2 decades. Out of the cracks, he crafted a manual, and that manual is not void of irony. The manual is an outline we can try to follow in our next act. The manual is actually appropriately called "You Have Not Yet Been Defeated." So 3 metaphors adapted from his manual following Alaa's invitation that can help us interact and coexist with AI in a way that is epistemically ironic. So the 3 modes: ghost, mushroom, and a regenerative plant. And the first imperative that I would like to introduce to you is let's become ghosts. This is how we interact. This is the spirit of the interaction with AI. This is where we reverse opacity, exist in spite of, wander spaces and tools waving their affordances. Ghosting is a way of being with regards to AI, and it can take many forms. And as Alaa has said, haunt the dreams of your comrades and the nightmares of your enemies. Live in a future that never came. Be a specter, a memory, and a herald. Remind them that the current state was not inevitable until it came to be. Alaa really reminds us of this. And there are certain digital artifacts that follow the same imperative. I think of Dries Deporter's The Watchers, which actually reverse this kind of narrative of hypervisibility and watching people who we should be holding accountable, being in spaces where the surveillance tech should really not be. The second, which is ironically not present, is Mimi Onoho's library of missing datasets. And really it's making visible the datasets that actually should be powering our AI systems, but are not, like datasets of domestic violence and labors of care that are not kind of included in these extractive logics of the AI ecosystems that we're part of. The second mode is becoming a mushroom, and it's perhaps in this fungal growth, this growing when you're not supposed to be, in concrete. As Anna Singh says, that foraging for mushrooms is a way of life. It's a common characteristic, and that there is an idea of assemblages that don't just gather lifeways, but actively make them. And again, here we see these kind of bots that existed on Twitter that used to tweet back at corporate accounts whenever they mentioned International Women's Day with their gender pay gaps. Here we find the fungal growth of alternative cartographies like queering the map. There's so many artifacts here to draw from, but the purpose here is to invite this mode of being into this room and into this festival. The third is regenerative plants, and it is important before we regenerate, to think of regenerative futures, to really understand and acknowledge that we've all been injured profoundly. As Donna Haraway says it, we require generation, not rebirth, and the possibilities of our reconstruction include the utopian dream of the hope for a monstrous world without gender. And again, here we have initiatives like cyberpunk, which is an alternative visual language of how we might regenerate, and various other invitations. So now we move into our third and final act. And actually, this act is going to be praise and meditation in what is yet to come. This is a work that invites the room to think of a mode of engagement with AI that is on-brand slow. And I'll just get into it. When we speak of data, risk is often an object of misplaced desire. It is an alien ship sailing across a fractured land, a blurry JPEG of imagined conceptual quicksand. While we speak of this risk, we speak of something often existential, seldom consequential, yet deeply rooted in an essential trade of supply and demand. Risk becomes a muse for a colonial ambition, a greedy merchant on an extractive mission to build a heaven in any land far away from our land, where space is Mars, emancipation is a farce, and plurality erased with little reprimand. World building becomes a solo dance, of falling leaves on a lifeless tree, where our only salvation becomes a necessary poetry, which can no longer remain a luxury. So think of a garden instead, or an invitation to shed. Power embodied in technologies of despair. A garden is an ecosystem of collective care. So here it is, guided meditation, how to grow your garden of algorithmic care. Step 1, breathe. Adjust yourself in your seat, embracing the phone in your pocket. As you inhale, think of your favorite notification. Or perhaps think of a clock where work is not your only indication. As you exhale, remember, a digital space also longs for breath. A tool yearns for a happy life, then seeks a gentle death. As you inhale once more, gently note that air is infinity's closest cousin, not computation. Step 2, center. As you place your feet firmly on the ground, remember that a ground truth is often a distorted reflection. While your truth is a stream, you must center yourself as a question. Allow yourself to err, manifest, and dream. Allow yourself to center yourself in a truth in which you are not the center. As you look to the confines of this room, invite yourself to become a humble fungi or a resilient mushroom. Step 3, stretch. Now, maintaining your breath, slowly reach a hand up and imagine the last memory you might ever make online. The last time you trained a data set on salvation or danced with time for moving across realms of critical imagination, one must maintain a cosmic flexibility. For a few minutes each day, give yourself the ability to stretch yourself beyond binaries of constant optimization. And whenever at ease, flirt with nonlinear clocks and transition into melodies of regeneration. Love the monstrosity of unlearning and the loving act of amputation. Unlearning can reinvent every situation. Step 4, cuddle. As you embrace yourself, think of how your digital self can be held. Think of models as the blueprints for homes we need to build. Cuddle the idea that salvation is never technical, but almost always human. In the presence of caring soil, colonial past and decolonial presence can come to fertile conclusions. Embrace dissent whenever harm is met with delusion, and when talking to omnipresent chatbots, remember, the view from nowhere is almost always, most definitely, an illusion. Step 5. As we witness technical parrots turning sour, let us pledge to plant seeds rather than grow towers. Pledge to treat our data with the same care we'd assign a flower. Let us pledge to never pledge alone or plunge into models of crooked power. Pledge to be bold, weed out biases when harm is most cold. Pledge to imagine metrics beyond a binary fair. Pledge for multiple, pledge for queer, and pledge to farm this garden of cybernetic care. Let us pledge in this garden to turn these verses into universes. Let us pledge to turn these verses into universes. Let us build away from a binary of phobia, grow strangers with fear, immerse in the rhythm of a gentle protopia. Let us sway to the tune of an unwavering clock. Let us ponder, flaunt, and mock. Let us question, meditate, and flock. Let us meditate on a joy, a critical joy, a joy that when needed is a license to destroy the singular story of building fast and breaking things, disrupting this violent, never-ending allegory. Let us rejoice, and to rejoice is to kill the idea that emancipation is somehow grown in a laboratory. Let us decide with shock that with our singular drops of critical imagination, there is a rooted notion that only we can form an ocean. Thank you.